Good evening. I'm going to give you an update on my situation with the UK banking industry, but also the scandal that is closing down thousands of business accounts so far this year. Joe Biden is in the United Kingdom, but rifts with NATO are beginning to appear. Is Biden effectively now backing the European army? And we'll look at the BBC latest. Is it really the scandal that the tabloids would have us believe? I've been somewhat sceptical from the start. But first, let's get the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Nigel. Good evening. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. And our top story tonight, a lawyer representing the young person involved in the BBC presenter scandal has told the corporation that their mother's allegations are, quote, rubbish and nothing inappropriate or unlawful happened. It comes after police said that they would work to establish if there is any evidence of a criminal offence, following reports that a presenter paid a teenager for explicit photos. The corporation announced yesterday that it had suspended the unnamed star almost 2 months after a complaint was first made. A teenager has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder after a teacher was stabbed at Tewkesbury Academy in Gloucestershire. The secondary school was put into temporary lockdown along with 2 neighbouring schools following concerns that the suspect may have fled the scene. Police say they do not believe the incident was terror-related. US President Joe Biden has completed his brief tour of the UK after meetings with the Prime Minister and the King. He's now travelled to Lithuania for a 2-day NATO summit, which starts tomorrow. Mr. Biden was given a warm welcome at Windsor Castle earlier, where he discussed climate issues with the King. That followed a meeting with Rishi Sunak at Downing Street, where, despite recent tensions over Ukraine, both leaders paid tribute to the special relationship. The Home Secretary has reiterated the government's commitment to detaining illegal migrants who arrive in the UK on small boats. Suella Braverman was speaking following the arrival of almost 1,500 people since Friday. The provisional total for 2023 so far is about 4% lower than this time last year, when around 13,200 crossings, or people rather, had crossed. And more than 100,000 holidaymakers have been affected by EasyJet's summer flight cancellations. The airline has cancelled around 1,700 flights between July and September, most from Gatwick Airport. Fridays and weekends are expected to be most at risk of disruption. EasyJet saying it's due to air traffic control restrictions rather than staff shortages. 95% of passengers booked onto alternative flights. Andy Samu is stuck in Budapest because his flight was cancelled. He spoke to us earlier on.
We were given a hotel, but many of the passengers were asked to sleep 2 to a room, which I've not seen before. It's quite unusual to see that. We've had further disruption this morning because some parents with their children have been given seats on different rows from their children. And we received a refreshment voucher, which is worth £2.55 in local currency. And I've tried 4 shops and none of them will take it.
We're on TV, online, on DAB Plus Radio and on TuneIn too. This is GB News. Time now for Nigel Farage.
Good evening, I'm back. My break from GB News was rather shorter than it had originally been planned to be. I say break, I went to Normandy, it was lovely, but my phone was ringing off the hook every 5 minutes because what I had to say about my situation with the British banking industry has led to thousands of people coming forwards who have been treated appallingly. And tonight I'm asking you, are you happy with your bank? Get in touch with us, please, gbnews.com. So, what really makes me angry is when the banks got it wrong, completely wrong, and threatened to bring down the economy, we bailed them out. Sorry, you bailed them out. Our taxes went up as a direct result of it, and yet they're free to treat us with absolute contempt. I hadn't, when I went away, named the bank in question, but Coutts themselves briefed the BBC. They told them that apparently I didn't have enough money in my account. This turned out to be completely untrue, as scores of Coutts customers came forward to say they didn't have £1 million sitting around in their current account either. Quite what made Coots think they could breach GDPR rules and my own privacy is completely beyond me. They even denied that I was a PEP, a politically exposed person, which again turns out not to be true. Now, at the root of all of this are money laundering rules, crazy compliance in British banks, and in my particular case, an EU directive on money laundering that applied to people in politics. And of course, this affects me and other prominent public political figures. But of more concern are the thousands of businesses, ranging from window cleaners to pawnbrokers, who've had their accounts closed down this year. And it seems to affect people who take cash. Yes, your local window cleaner could be a great money launderer, according to many of our banks. The worst of the banks at closing accounts will appear from my inbox. And by the way, it's been one of the biggest inboxes I've ever had in my life. Thank you so much for the support and information that you've been sending in to me. But it really is a major scandal. Now, for myself, at a cost of many thousands of pounds, I've gone to find out my world compliance profile. This is what's said by the big international agencies about me. Oh, and they'll have notes on you as well. In my case, it's a series of Guardian articles, EU disputes when I was there in the European Parliament when they endlessly accused me of wrongdoing. But what is much, much, much worse is on my profile, there is a long list of family members. Me, my company, my family, and even associates and friends of mine are all to be treated as PEPs. This has now been confirmed, and it is all, I think, deeply sinister and potentially could be misused by bad governments. I realise that by becoming the whistleblower for this, and this has happened to me, I mean, we've even learnt that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, was turned down by Mondo, that Lord Kenneth Clarke had his American Express card removed, having had it for almost 50 years. This has happened to many, many other prominent public figures. But they've chosen not to speak out. I've become the whistleblower for this. And the problem is, I think, having done this, I'm now a pariah in terms of the UK banking industry. And right at the moment, I have absolutely zero chance of getting a UK bank account. That is the mess that I currently find myself in. So what needs to happen? We've had the Treasury Minister saying that potentially, when a vicar has his account closed because he questions why the front of his bank is covered in pride flags, that there could be a very deeply sinister effect on free speech, and they're right. We've even had Andrew Griffith, the City Minister, write to the FCA, the regulator, to ask the question, are banks doing their job properly? But it isn't just for government to talk, it's for government to act. It is 7 years since we voted to leave the European Union, and there needs to be a change, a rapid change to that EU directive that I and others have been caught by. We also need to stop penalising small businesses in the way that we are. It's outrageous. And please, please, if you're a small business who has been closed down, then please email me here, nfarage@gbnews.com. I want to find out, more and more of you. The bigger case studies we can build, the more we're going to get Parliament to act. And by the way, well done, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for fighting and arguing for a change to a law in Parliament today, saying people should not be shut down because their opinions do not align with the so-called values of the bank. And perhaps biggest of all, I think we all should have the right to a bank account. Every one of us. You have that in France, you have that in Germany. We used to have it in our country until Sir Vince Cable privatised the post office, and that right no longer applies. There is an all-out war on cash. It's about control of our lives at every level. It will inevitably end up with central bank digital currencies. Already, we are recruiting people working in that field. The pilot scheme will be launched in 2030. And that's why I am backing wholeheartedly, 100%, GB News's Don't Kill Cash campaign. So please go to gbnews.com/cash, sign our petition. There's a QR code there on the screen. Now, we use this, of course, for voting for the Trick Awards. The QR code is there. Don't kill cash. Cash brings us freedom. State control of our money would be a complete and utter disaster. Now, the news headlines have been utterly dominated over the course of the last few days by the BBC scandal and by the illegality of a BBC presenter who has now been suspended. I kept asking myself, what is it this presenter had done that was illegal? You may think it's immoral. You may think what he's done is wrong, but surely not illegal. Had the Sun newspaper gone too far? All of that in just a moment. Well, I asked you, are you happy with your bank? Stuart says, personally, I'm happy with all my accounts. They're fully working as they should. Nevertheless, I have grave concerns about the experiences other people are having. Ryan says no, because they're in the pockets of Marxist organisations that are seeking to destroy British society. I don't think our banks are Marxist, Ryan, but they're certainly corporatist. And another, anonymous, says, my bank, who I've been with for some time, refused me a sole trader account without explanation. I have never been in debt or withdrawn. Another bank gave me an account within minutes, so I closed the other. Well, well done you for finding another account. Unfortunately, I'm not in that position. Now, the big story, of course, has been the BBC scandal. This exchange of photographs, videos, whatever they may be, a large sum of money paid by a prominent BBC News presenter to a young man, and lots of talk that it was illegal. And I've been questioning how and why is this illegal. It was the mother of this young person that spoke to the Sun newspaper, and that's where the story has come from. I've been pretty sceptical as to whether anything that went on here is illegal. But there have been a couple of bombshells on this story in the last couple of hours, and let's go to New Broadcasting House and join GB News reporter, national reporter, Paul Hawkins. Paul, bring us up to speed. What's happened in the last hour or so?
Yeah, it's a confusing picture, Nigel. So first of all, we had the statement from the lawyer representing the young person in the past few hours. They said that their client contacted the Sun on Friday via WhatsApp, saying that the statement their mother made to the newspaper was totally wrong and there was no truth to it. Nonetheless, the Sun newspaper proceeded to publish what the lawyer describes as an inappropriate article, and it also goes on to say that for the avoidance of doubt, nothing inappropriate or unlawful has taken place between our client and the BBC personality, and the allegations reported in the Sun newspaper are, in their words, rubbish. Then, about half an hour later, we get a statement from the Sun that says, "We have reported a story about two very concerned parents who made a complaint to the BBC about the behaviour of a presenter and the welfare of their child. Their complaint was not acted upon by the BBC. We have seen evidence that supports their concerns. It's now for the BBC to properly investigate." So you've got claim here made by the mother of the young person and counterclaim made by the young person themselves. You've got now the Sun's reputation on the line here as well, because so far I've been through those articles again that they've published. I can't see any evidence. There's no screenshots. There's no, it's simply the allegations made by the mother. So the Sun's journalism is this evening at stake, and still some questions for the BBC, who have said nothing really today about what has happened. There's an ongoing investigation. They take the allegations very seriously. They're trying to establish the facts as fast as possible, but still questions have to be asked why, when this complaint was made on May the 19th, it has taken this long to act. Why was the presenter still on air? Potentially, it could be because the client, represented by the lawyer here, is saying that these allegations are totally rubbish. We just, simply put, Nigel, we don't know what's going on.
No.
It's been a vacuum here where there's a lot of speculation and very little fact, and that vacuum is even wider this evening.
Well, if you find the answer, please come back to us live at any point in this or any other programme. Thank you very much indeed. And important to note also that the Metropolitan Police have said there is no investigation at this time. Well, joining me is the ex-series editor of BBC's Question Time and former head of presentation for David Cameron, Nick Pisani of BBC. You've worked with the BBC for many years. There have been some awful scandals over the years, you know, Savile, Harris, Stuart Hall, you name it. This one, it's difficult now quite to know what to believe.
Very difficult.
Clearly a rift between, I say, and the young person is 20. Unusual, isn't it, for the parents to be speaking in public on behalf of a 20-year-old?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the central allegation was that the guy used the money raised, the alleged £35,000, to buy illegal hard drugs. And that's his mother talking about their child. So that in itself seemed a bit weird. But I think the alarm first went off this morning that the story may not be quite as it appears when Sir Craig Oliver, who is David Cameron's Director of Communications, he said that we as the public should be concerned that we haven't yet heard the full story. And then Kelvin Mackenzie, the very successful editor of The Sun across the 1980s, you know, when he was selling, or under his editorship, 4 or 5 million copies a day, he gave an interview to the BBC World at One programme today, and he said facts may yet come out that show that this story is not as it appears to be, and we'll see it through a very different light. Now, there'll be a lot of people with a lot of egg on their faces if what he says and what the lawyer's statement about on behalf of this younger person, if they prove to be correct. There's going to be a lot of people who've been having a go at the BBC on the presumption that what the Sun says, and the Sun's journalism is definitely on the line, is factually correct. Well, it may not be, it seems.
So what do the Sun do in a position like this?
Well, the Sun have made a rather strange statement saying that, you know, it's now for the BBC to investigate. We've put the facts before them. The BBC claim, and the mother claims that fresh evidence was put before them. But the truth is, we don't know.
This doesn't stack up, though, does it? The Sun's claim doesn't stack up because this has now all been reported to the Metropolitan Police, and the Metropolitan Police says there is no investigation at this time. Presumably, if the Met Police had seen anything they were concerned about, they would have acted in some way.
Well, I assume that statement would be followed by one tonight saying that we've now opened an official inquiry, having had their conversations with the BBC. But they, I imagine, were shown evidence this morning that the Sun claims to be so solid that they've dominated the headlines of their own publication and almost every other for the last 3 days.
No, they have. Well, if they're wrong...
I mean, if they're wrong, this is going to be... very, very serious. It's going to be serious for a lot of organisations. And the BBC may turn out to have handled this absolutely correctly. They may have been completely right in not releasing the name of the presenter who's alleged to have been at the centre of the storm because...
This is interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, the Cliff Richard case, in which the BBC had a helicopter filming the police raiding Cliff Richard's house, and all of that has led on, hasn't it, to Supreme Court judgments that actually the presumption of innocence before guilt is pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the BBC, going back to the Cliff Richard story, as I recall, were landed in serious trouble in court because he contested what they said. Yeah. And they were forced to apologise. They were forced to say they were wrong. Now, they have a duty of care to their employees. And if the allegations turn out to be made up or fake, they will have been absolutely right not to have released this guy's name or whoever the presenter is. And this presenter's supposedly a high-profile presenter.
The trouble is, Nick, in the modern world, the internet, Twitter, is what it is.
Yeah.
What recourse is there? It's
very little. I mean, Jeremy Vine was making that very point when he was saying, you know, not me. And Nicky Campbell was talking about seeking legal advice on defamation. I'm not sure that there is any comeback, save to say that I think the vast majority of the population will not know who this person is if it turns out that they are the subject of false or at least misleading claims. Because the mother is also not saying, I think, that there is no relationship, only that there was nothing illegal about the relationship. You have to ask, what is motivating these people? Drugs are involved, it seems, by the mother's own confession.
And the mother claims, and the son claimed, not to have paid the mother.
Yeah, well,
which again seems very strange.
Yes, I mean, the whole thing seems very strange because the BBC was supposedly told back in May, and then it was only last Thursday that Tim Davie, the Director-General, was told because they were shown new supporting evidence that they took very seriously. And now we have the Sun with a rather wishy-washy statement saying, well, it's for the BBC to prove that what we're saying is not correct.
And I think the onus is perhaps the other way around.
Well, just think of the consequences if the tabloid... This feels like a pre-Leveson story. Do you remember the types back in the early 20s when anything goes, the names were straight out? You were on the receiving end of more than one of them. So, I mean, I just think right now, we don't know. But in the next 24 hours, I think either the BBC will have been judged to have handled this very well or very badly, and if it turns out that they're the subject of some kind of hoax, again, they'll have been shown to handle it quite well. We mustn't forget, you know, television, media, it attracts celebrity, it attracts people who want to be notorious. So if you make up an allegation, a serious allegation, and you go forward to the broadcaster and put this allegation to them, and there's no supporting evidence, and they've released the name of the person, well, that's going to make the BBC look terrible, and their employees are going to feel very unsafe.
Nick Bassani are very high for both sides of it.
They are very high.
Moral of the story, folks at home, is do not believe every single rumour you see or hear. I'm going to be back to you in a moment, talking about Mr Biden being in Downing Street and what are we going to do about NATO, given the disagreements. But first, let's get the weather.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Alex Deakin here from the Met Office with your latest GB News weather forecast. A wet one tonight for large chunks of the country. We do have Met Office yellow warnings in place. Quite mild and quite blustery, all thanks to low pressure. It's been throwing cloud and rain in from the Atlantic for much of the day across the west. Whilst we've seen some sunny spells in the east, the cloud is now thickening. Further rain to come across southwest England and the Midlands, but the heaviest rain across Scotland, where we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. Also seen some downpours today across parts of of Northern Ireland. So some further disruption likely through this evening and overnight. It does turn a little drier over North Wales and Northern England. Quite a mild night, particularly in the southeast. Temperatures really holding up here, and a dull, damp, humid start to Tuesday. That rain should peter out across East Anglia and southern counties of England. And then it's a case of, yes, some sunny spells, but also plenty of showers moving through on a brisk breeze for most. But light winds in northern Scotland means we could see some slow-moving, intense, even thundery downpours here during the afternoon. Temperature-wise, again, around or maybe a touch below average for the time of year, struggling to get into the low 20s for most places. A dry, sunny start across eastern England during Wednesday, but then the showers get going again through the day. So again, it'll be a case of dodging the downpours, perhaps not as many, not as intense, but still some lively showers moving through. And again, things on the cool side in the breeze with temperatures high teens or low 20s at best.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Well, aren't we lucky? The leader of the free world, Joe Biden, has popped into London today. He's gone to see the King. He, of course, having a marvellous time discussing climate change. He also went to Downing Street to meet Rishi Sunak, where both pretended that the special relationship is rock solid and that everything is fine. But he's really hopping on the way to Vilnius for what I think is a very important NATO summit. It really, really is. Joining me to discuss this is Niall Gardner, Director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. He's been to the UK quite a bit lately, but doesn't really like us, does he?
Yeah, I would say that Biden does not like Britain at all. In fact, he really hates Britain in many respects, and he is doing his best to destroy the special relationship. I expect that the American people are glad that he's out of the country for a few days, at least. But his visit really, basically a non-visit in terms of overall importance, pales in comparison, for example, with Donald Trump's state visit a few years ago. And Biden has done his best really to knife Britain in the back on multiple fronts over the course of the last couple of years. So he's no friend of the British people.
No, and a really important moment here, because the NATO summit in Vilnius, the Biden administration have decided they will give cluster bombs to Ukraine. There are 120 nations who have signed up to wanting to stop the manufacture of them completely. The United Kingdom is one of them. The worry is that this ordnance can lie around for years and years afterwards. I know the Russians are using it. I get that. But where's NATO going? I mean, you know, the Brits are mistakenly, in my view, calling for Ukraine to be allowed entry to NATO immediately. But longer term, the direction of NATO is my concern. Ben Wallace, ex-army officer, heart and soul in defence and NATO, has apparently been vetoed by Joe Biden for
Ursula von der Leyen,
the president of the European Commission, and a woman who, when she was defence minister in Germany, was thought to have done a terrible job. What is going on here?
Yeah, great questions. And I think that von der Leyen had an absolutely disastrous tenure as Germany's defence minister. And she is the last person on earth you'd want to have running the NATO alliance. Biden is, in essence, a Euro-federalist. He hates Brexit. He did not want to see a British defence secretary in place. He torpedoed Ben Wallace's candidacy for NATO Secretary General. Wallace is by far the best qualified person, I think, to lead the NATO alliance. But Biden could not get over his own prejudice against Britain, his hatred of Brexit, but also he is at heart really very pro-EU. He's pro-French, he's pro-German.
Well, you see, I wonder about this. I wonder whether what some of the American administration are thinking is that with von der Leyen, NATO, in effect, becomes more of a European army with less input needed from America.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. I do think there are many in the Biden administration who support these delusions of grandeur about creating a European Union army. And I think that if you have the president of the European Commission taking over NATO, in effect, becomes an extension of the Euro-federalist sort of dream,
This
actually.
is what worries me. Although
exactly.
I also worry, though, Niall, that in 13 years of so-called Conservative government in this country, we have run down the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy and the British Army to the most extraordinary degree. We had a retired boss of the Royal Air Force on our programme last week saying global Britain's now fantasy, we're not big enough, we're not strong enough. Could it also be that whilst we've had amazing relations between our militaries over the years, that America's beginning to look at the UK and not taking its military force seriously?
Well, I think that's true, actually. I think what we have seen with the UK's military capability is a gradual erosion of it. That has to be reversed. Britain needs to spend more on its defence, needs to build up greater capability. There are many in Washington who doubt Britain's long-term commitment, actually, to a very strong, forward-looking military. And I think that what you are seeing is a lack of confidence, actually.
That worries me.
In the UK. That's a dangerous path forward. This has to be reversed.
Even without Biden's prejudice towards this country.
Exactly.
You know, the senior retired American military figures are saying we're not taking you guys quite as seriously as we were. Final quick one. What are the scores on my doors? What are the polls telling us in America at this stage?
Well, I would say that, firstly, Biden's doing very badly against a whole range of Republican candidates. And the American people increasingly view Biden as just too old. And frankly, Biden's out of his mind a lot of the time. We saw that at Windsor Castle today, where he was wandering around. He had to be shepherded by King Charles III.
Really
but I do think there is a conservative revolution in the United States right now. There is a resurgence of support for US conservatives, and I think the fight back is very much in place against what is the most far-left presidency, I think, in American history. And I do think that Biden's days are numbered.
Interesting. Niall, thank you. And now they're mentioning a conservative fight back taking place in America. And it's happening in France, and it's happening in Germany, and it's happening in Spain, and it's happening in Italy. It's happening everywhere, apart from the United Kingdom, well, they've virtually given up on being Conservatives. Now, my What the Farage moment. How extraordinary in this amazing Pride Month that we're all celebrating so much, that at a rally yesterday, Sarah Jane Baker, a trans activist who campaigns on behalf of trans prisoners, someone who was released from prison 3 years ago after serving 30 years for the kidnapping and attempted murder of her stepmother's brother, and for attempting to kill another prisoner whilst incarcerated. Yes, despite that, Sarah Jane Baker was one of the main speakers. And just have a look at what she had to say.
I was going to come here and be really fluffy and be really nice and say, yeah, be really lovely and queer and gay. No, if you see a punch him in the face.
There we are. Advocating violence, advocating punching in the face TERFs. These are radical feminists. Apparently, people who write books like Harry Potter would be in that category. Absolutely appalling. Isn't it funny how the incitement of violence seems to be ignored when it's part of Pride Month? And to find out what the Farage, what is it with our country? The local council in York, having conducted an investigation, rather like the England and Wales Cricket Board, have decided that York is utterly beyond the pale. It is culturally, institutionally racist in every regard. It is apparently a complete hellhole to live in, all of which, of course, is total nonsense. It's one of the best places to live in the whole of England, but we constantly try to do ourselves down. We're going to stop the boats. And remember Rishi Sunak 5 weeks ago in Dover on a Monday saying the numbers are down by 20%. I told you that evening this was all nonsense. It was because of the weather. In a moment, I'm going to tell you what happened over the weekend and why the Dutch Prime Minister is about to fall.
The 12th, a day to celebrate history, community and family here in Northern Ireland. Join me, Arlene Foster.
And me, Dougie Beattie, as we bring you live coverage of the July 12th celebrations from the beautiful city of Belfast.
And right across the United Kingdom. It's all happening here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I've been coming out regularly around the country doing live shows with you, the audience. They've been going pretty well. Next Thursday, the 20th of July, will be the 40th Farage at Large, and it'll take place in Newport in South Wales. Now, we've sold it out already. We've now booked a bigger venue. If you want to come to Newport for a live Farage at Large, live at 7 o'clock next Thursday in Newport, please go to gbnews.com. As I said before the break, Rishi Sunak saying he was stopping the boats, the numbers were coming down, is complete and utter nonsense. To bring us up to date, GB News' Home Affairs editor Mark White has given us this report.
Crossings are now down 20% compared to last year. This is proof that our deterrent strategy can work.
It was a bold claim. Just a month ago, the Prime Minister down in Dover insisting his Stop the Boats plan was working. But since then, a surge in small boat arrivals has exposed that claim to be at best premature. The latest arrivals at Dover Harbour come amid an improvement in weather conditions, which has seen more than 1,500 people brought here in just 4 days. In fact, the number of arrivals for the year so far has reached the 13,000 mark. That figure is the same as the 13,000 who crossed at this point last year. Maritime experts who know these waters well say the initial 20% reduction in crossings was purely down to bad weather and not government policy. Despite the clearly increasing numbers of Channel migrants, the Home Secretary has reiterated her determination to stop the boats.
Well, Prime Minister and I are absolutely clear. We've got to stop the boats. That's why we're working very hard to introduce new legislation. Last year, there were 45,000 people who arrived illegally. It's costing us £6 million a day in hotel accommodation. This has to stop.
The surge in small boat arrivals is just the latest setback to the government's plans to tackle the Channel migrant crisis. The Court of Appeal ruled the deal to send some of those arriving to Rwanda is unlawful. And in Parliament, the Lords are continuing to block the progress of the government's illegal migration bill. Weather conditions in the Channel are set to get choppy in the days ahead. But we're heading for the peak months, where flat camp conditions will pave the way for thousands more to cross. And if those figures continue to increase beyond last year's totals, Rishi Sunak will face the prospect of failing to meet one of his government's key priorities. Mark White, GB News.
Well, there you are, all complete and utter rot from the Prime Minister. Nothing is stopping, nothing is changing. Tens of thousands more will come this year, be in no doubt about that, and its impact all over the country. But it isn't just here we're talking about this. No, in the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, who's been serving on and off as Prime Minister since 2010, has given in his resignation to the King, and it's all over immigration. I'm joined live from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, somewhere I know really rather well, by Michael Hugeveen, who's an MEP for J21 from the Netherlands. What on earth? I mean, we thought Mr. Rutte was there forever. What's the row about? What is going on? How big is immigration as a debate in the Netherlands?
Well, for we as Dutch people, it really feels like the end of an era. He has been our prime minister for over 13 years, and 4 years before that, he was opposition leader. So especially for people from my generation, I mean, I was walking around the college dorms when he became prime minister. So for my generation, it really feels like, well, saying goodbye to what I should also honestly say, a remarkable, skilled politician. But he failed on multiple issues, and one of the biggest issues he failed on for campaigning for 12 years was curbing the influx of migration and of migrants, and he failed to do so, and well, it's all over now.
Yeah, so what happens? I guess we get a new set of elections that take place in November, I think they're scheduled to be. Everything seems to move very slowly in Netherlands politics, but November is being touted as the time for the next election. We talked a moment ago about a revival of conservative views, meaning more control of borders, taking place in Italy and France and Germany. What is the political weather vane telling us in the Netherlands?
Well, we're a coalition country, so we need to form government coalition, and that's where it went wrong with Prime Minister Mark Rutte, because he chose to govern with left-leaning social liberals and left-leaning social Christian parties, who are still in favor of this welcoming asylum procedures. And we, as J21, we did all kinds of amendments on limiting family reunification, agreements with third countries such as Rwanda, strict border controls, putting pressure on African and Middle Eastern countries to take back the migrants. But everything was voted down by him. So what we're seeing now is really a shift in the Dutch electorate, moving towards more skeptical parties towards immigration, and also inherently towards the immigration policies by the European Union.
But isn't this really, Michael, your problem? That the numbers that have crossed the Mediterranean so far this year are significantly higher than numbers that have come last year. And I sat in that building. I sat in that building in 2015 when the EU asylum policy was announced, and it was announced on behalf of all of us, that basically anyone that set foot on EU soil would be allowed to stay. And that's why people move up into Sweden, into the Netherlands and elsewhere. Frankly, I honestly don't see that as EU members, there's very much your government can do about this.
Well, I still remember back in 2015 with Angela Merkel from Germany saying reschaffen das. Rutte also said this is a once-in-a-lifetime influx of immigrants. But what we actually see now is that record after record of influx of immigrants are still coming to the Netherlands. And that is mostly because of, well, the policies you probably remember that were invoked by Jean-Claude Juncker back in 2015. Yep. And since then, 27,000 migrants have have died on the Mediterranean, which is a big tragedy. And we as the EU should realize that the only solution to this is, well, for example, looking at what Denmark is now trying to do within the EU. Sweden is also doing in the EU, is try to come up with a more of an Australian model by making it crystal clear, no way will the EU be your home to the migrants that are willing or coming across the Mediterranean.
Yeah, I think the Poles and Hungarians have had a fair bit to say about these issues as well. Now, of course, Dutch politics, Netherlands politics, proportional representation, as you've said already, it is by necessity a country of coalition. And we do see big shifts in voting patterns. But what happened with the Rural Farmers' Party in the Senate elections recently was astonishing. Just bring British viewers up to date on that, please.
Well, what we're seeing now is that the Dutch voters are still looking for a party that is really anti-establishment, but also wants to deliver. The Farmers' Party became the biggest party. They are now in some provincial coalitions, but the Dutch voters are also looking at my party in particular to deliver on migration. What we're saying is, if you want a strict and more fair and humane immigration policy, they should vote for us, because we are the ones who are truly going to deliver that.
No, fine, I get that. But returning to the rural theme about the farmers, we've seen these huge protests, in your country. Is this now a moment when people are genuinely questioning what we're doing in the name of net zero?
Well, there are so many crises, Nigel, crises that are made up by our politicians. I mean, if we take this farmers' protest, for example, that's mostly about the pollution of nitrogen dioxide and ammonia. They come up with these kinds of laws, and then they point at the judges. But I mean, we can not only point at judges, because who makes the laws? That is elected politicians, the people in government. So in order to change this, we need to change governments, and people need to vote for different parties.
And final thought, when are you as a country going to regain your pride and go for Nexit and become an independent country like us?
Well, we miss you dearly as Brits in the European Parliament. We really miss the British style of debate. It's all French, it's all German. I have to listen it via my translators. It hasn't been a lot of fun. But we're still fighting the good fight here, and we really believe that we can still reform this EU, go back to its roots, go back to it being a strong common market with strong external borders. We still believe we can do that, but, well it's fighting the good fight.
I wish you luck with that, and I'm so sorry that you missed me in my debating style in the chamber, but thank you for joining me from Strasbourg.
Thanks for having me.
This evening. Well, yesterday was a very nerve-wracking day, not because I haven't got a bank account, no, but because the Ashes, there was so much hope and expectation, but it all appeared to have gone horribly wrong as we went 2-0 down. But yesterday afternoon, Headingley, we had a chance to get one back, and boy, it was a real nail-biter up to the very wire. And I do have a Barrage the Farage that was sent in yesterday from Neil, who was watching the Ashes at Headingley. What have you got for me, Neil?
Hi Nigel, it's Neil. When are you going to get back on with this channel crossing problem? Because it's massive. We need to sort this out big time.
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone's tried harder than me to wake people up as to what's going on in the English Channel. And yes, nearly 1,500 have come over the course of the last 3 days. So I'm doing my absolute best on it. I really promise you that I am. Now, I'm joined by Jacob Rees-Mogg. Two big subjects of discussion, Jacob, maybe three. Number one, we won the game yesterday.
Won, yeah, wasn't it exciting?
It was terrific, wasn't it?
It was absolutely brilliant. And Australia was in it until so late on. And I mean, I was on the edge of my seat watching it. I very rarely sit at home watching cricket. I pay the subscription to get the channel, and then very rarely see it. But yesterday...
Yeah, I'm normally a radio, because I'm busy, I'm doing stuff, and I normally have it on the radio, but now I sat and watched.
Well, I met the great Jonathan Agnew recently, a BBC star we can have complete confidence in, and he reminded me I'd once called for him to get a pay rise, because somebody had been on about this footballer who gets paid a fortune, and I said, well, why don't we pay proper money to Jonathan Agnew?
Popular. Jacob, you put forward a piece of legislation saying that banks should not close people out as one of their views.
I'm going to put an amendment down to the Digital Markets Bill. That'll come back for report stage slightly later in the year to try and protect people in your position so that banks can't close your account down because it doesn't like your views. Or, as Metro Bank said to somebody, allegedly, you don't share our culture. And I don't care about my bank's culture. I just care that my checks get cleared and money goes into it and out of it.
You know, we've had some, since I sort of broke cover on this, a lot of other names have come out that have had problems with banks, and a lot of small businesses email me desperately. I mean, really desperately, with no one to speak for them. And I'm pleased at least to be doing that. We've had some fine words from the Treasury and you know, from Andrew Griffith, the City Minister. Are they actually going to act?
Well, there are two things they can do. One is the piece of legislation to make sure that people have a right to a bank account and their free speech doesn't change it. The other is on the politically exposed persons issue. That's secondary legislation. The government can change that tomorrow if it wants to.
Will they?
Well, I wouldn't hold my breath, but they really should, because it's very straightforward to do. We're no longer in the EU, we're no longer bound by EU law, which is where all this came from. It came from an international agreement before that, and then the EU
But the EU, you know, put hands on it.
And when you discover that Ken Clarke had a bank account refused.
I know.
Even the current Chancellor. I mean, this is absolute madness. This was meant to stop dictators siphoning off funds.
And the worry is it puts off good people going into public life, because they think, the hell with it, we can't put up with all of this.
And also its tentacles reach so wide. So it's not just the politician, it's the politician's family, it's the politician's associates. So the producers of our programmes are almost certainly politically exposed persons, and that's just so unfair.
I got my subject access request at the end of last week back from the international organisations. I'm horrified by the list. Jacob, it's all yours in just a moment. But before all of that, we have to go to the weather and, indeed, to the news.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Alex Deakin here from the Met Office with your latest GB News weather forecast. A wet one tonight for large chunks of the country. We do have Met Office yellow warnings in place. Quite mild and quite blustery, all thanks to low pressure. It's been throwing cloud and rain in from the Atlantic for much of the day across the west. Whilst we've seen some sunny spells in the east, the cloud is now thickening. Further rain to come across southwest England and the Midlands, but the heaviest rain across Scotland, where we do have a Met Office yellow warning in place. Also seen some downpours today across parts of of Northern Ireland. So some further disruption likely through this evening and overnight. It does turn a little drier over North Wales and Northern England. Quite a mild night, particularly in the southeast. Temperatures really holding up here, and a dull, damp, humid start to Tuesday. That rain should peter out across East Anglia and southern counties of England. And then it's a case of, yes, some sunny spells, but also plenty of showers moving through on a brisk breeze for most. But light winds in northern Scotland means we could see some slow-moving, intense, even thundery downpours here during the afternoon. Temperature-wise, again, around or maybe a touch below average for the time of year, struggling to get into the low 20s for most places. A dry, sunny start across eastern England during Wednesday, but then the showers get going again through the day. So again, it'll be a case of dodging the downpours, perhaps not as many, not as intense, but still some lively showers moving through. And again, things on the cool side in the breeze with temperatures high teens or low 20s at best.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.